7th Annual Common Ground Country Fair. The Common Ground Country Fair is hosted by the Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association, also known as MOFGA. My name is Sarah Alexander, and I'm the Executive Director of MOFGA. Formed in 1971, we work year-round to transform our food system by supporting our farmers, empowering people to feed their communities, and advocating for an organic future. This has been a particularly challenging year for our farmers, starting with federal funding cuts and leading into a very wet spring, followed by most of the state being in a drought for the last 2 months. MOFGA is here to support our farmers, but we need your support to stay strong through the USDA funding cuts. We encourage you to visit the MOFGA tent to learn more, and you can become a member of MOFGA right here at the fair, or make a donation online at mofga.org to support our year-round work. On this beautiful sunny day, we are excited to share that MOFGA and the fair are entirely powered by the sun. We have a 102 kilowatt solar array on the grounds, which was installed in 2017 with our partner Revision Energy. And MOFGA's campus is 300 acres situated in unceded Wabanaki homelands. MOFGA is working throughout the year to support Wabanaki food sovereignty projects and advocate for Wabanaki tribal sovereignty. We encourage everyone to visit the Wabanaki Arts Tent right here on the Commons to support Wabanaki artisans and learn more. I'm pleased to introduce our keynotes today. We have two that will be speaking in conversation with each other. Adam Alexander is a writer, storyteller, and award-winning film and television producer. He has been involved in horticulture for most of his life, and he maintains a living collection of over 500 varieties of heterogeneous, adaptive, climate-resilient crops, lecturing widely on his work. Since he discovered his first heirloom pepper in the late 80s, he has been on a quest to seek out unusual, rare, endangered, and above all, delicious vegetables that he could grow at home. Saving seeds of these varieties is at the heart of what he does for the Heritage Seed Library. It's to share with other growers, to return to the cultures that have lost or are losing them, and to encourage the cultivation of local varieties in the UK that can be widely enjoyed by everyone who wants to reconnect with their own food culture and eat local. Also joining him will be C.R. Lawn. C.R. Lawn was the founder of Maine-based FEDCO Seeds Cooperative. He's been a powerful advocate of the organic movement and cooperative business models in the food system. He is an amazing visionary and has long been involved with MOFGA, both as a board member, a volunteer, and filling just about every other role that we've had imaginable throughout the years. So we're really honored to have C.R. back with us here today. Please join me in welcoming Adam and C.R. to the stage.
Thank you, Sarah, and all the wonderful people who make this event possible. It's my great pleasure to introduce Adam Alexander, storyteller, world traveler, and a person with a really timely message. And I owe my acquaintance with Adam to his publisher, Chelsea Green. I have a long connection with Chelsea Green. It dates back way back to when they had published Carol Deppy's classic Breed Your Own Vegetable Varieties. And this book started a movement in America, and but it had gone out of print. It had sold out, gone out of print, and I buttonholed their editor and suggested that they needed to reprint it. Ben Watson, he took me up on it. And then later on, Ben edited my wife, Ellie Rugos's book on heritage grains, and subsequently, on infrequent occasions, I have written blurbs for Chelsea Green books that I particularly liked, including Adam's first book called The Seed Detective. And so their editor asked me to do that again, and in the process I became a reader for Adam's new book, which is The Accidental Seed Heroes. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Adam, and I have a question for him, which is, why seed heroes? What's a seed hero? And why, of all things, would they be accidental? And how does one go about becoming an accidental seed hero? So, Adam.
Thank you for the question. See, there's a couple of things you should know about our relationship, which was that when I started working on this new book, The Accidental Seed Heroes, I thought I really need somebody who knows something about the subject, who I could send some chapters to. And they used to come back from CR, and he reminded me of my old English master who had a great affection for the red pen. Needless to say, as an author, I took the best of his advice and ignored very little of it, which was actually jolly good, but I'm an author, so hell, I'm going to write what I want to write. But I've been very, very fortunate to get to know CR, and he's given me a really interesting feel and insight for what's happening here, whereas I've been telling him what's happening in the rest of the world. And I'm really honoured to be here today, and it's fantastic to come to this event, which is for an outsider quite unique, and it has a really wonderful vibe. And the thing that my first impression, which is so inspiring, is how many young people there are here. We my generation sneer about Gen Z, or as we in England call them, Gen Z. But it is fantastic that there is such a diversity of youth here connecting with a journey that people like CR and I have been on for half a century or more. But to answer his question, anyone, whether you're a professional breeder or grower, whether you're a homesteader or just a regular gardener like me, I think, can be a seed hero when you are part of a process which is maintaining and contributing to the genetic diversity that we need back in our crops. And it's this desire, if you like, to restore something that we've lost really since the end of the World War II. If you think about it, the great diversity of crops that have underpinned the story of civilization I love this guy. That diversity existed because of the genius of, first of all, our Neolithic forebears, who 12,000 years ago started to domesticate the wild parents of the crops that we so depend on and around which we identify. And they did it not in a systematic way. They weren't conscious plant breeders. They just looked at what was changing in their fields. They were looking at these wild crops, particularly grasses were very, very important. If you think about cereals, 12,000 years ago, when this process of domestication started, and it was when they saw things that were different. Do you know what? That ear of corn looks a bit different. I wonder what it tastes like. It seems to be growing very well in my corner of, the Near East or Mesoamerica, wherever you were, living as a Neolithic farmer. And then they started this process of selection. And Mother Nature kind of did the rest. And that's the thing that I really love about how these changes are all accidental. It's because of the complexities of the DNA in these, what we call very heterogeneous and diverse wild crops, enabled them to change and to evolve. And this evolution was something that just happened and continued over time. And because we ourselves are so diverse, wherever it was that we were in our world, there were certain things that we wanted to focus on. It was to do with, first of all, does it grow in my neck of the woods? Does it taste good? It's not going to kill me, because let's not forget that pretty much every wild parent of all the crops that we eat today, they didn't actually want a bunch of herbivores eating them. They needed to defend themselves. So a lot of them were really, really toxic. You only have to think about something that is fundamental to American food culture, the squash. Those wild squashes 7, 8, 9,000 years ago, before we started to domesticate them, if you ate them, they'd kill you. And so it's amazing that our forebears, through patience and careful selection, were able to select the things that actually weren't going to kill them when they ate them. And we end up with what we have today. I was very interested to try and share this interest, passion, enthusiasm that I have for what it is that growing vegetables, what they tell us about ourselves. And so when I wrote my first book, I live in southeast Wales. It's generally cooler and wetter than here, although we've had the hottest and driest summer on record. But it has a climate where I can grow pretty much anything all year round. There's not a day of the year that I can't go into my garden and harvest something. And I wanted to understand where our vegetables, the things that I love the most, come from. And I had selected 14 of my most favorite things that I grow, 7 who had started their lives east of my garden in what we call the Fertile Crescent, and 7 that had started their lives west of my garden in what we call the New World, but were in fact the region of Mesoamerica. And what I learned was that actually the story of the domestication of crops and plant breeding is really the story of civilization, because it was only when we became settled farmers that we were able to have the time to do things like invent writing, build cities, create societies. For that we were hunter-gatherers. And in this world that I found myself in, I wanted to discover new crops that were delicious, and I also wanted to kind of see myself as part of not so much a counter-revolution in plant breeding, although it is a counter-revolution that we're seeing happen now, but what I call a counter-evolution. And so I've had the privilege over many years to hang out with farmers, to meet plant breeders of all types, including molecular men and women in white coats. And but most importantly, where I really found my journeys of discovery the most fruitful was in the company of particularly Indigenous farmers. And they were the ones who had developed through just maintaining this things that were local matter to them, this huge diversity of crops that we are now starting to rebuild from a time when we had lost 90% of them up until about 50 years ago. So I feel myself as a seed saver, as part of a continuum, because until really the middle of the 19th century, it was farmers who were plant breeders. We didn't have people working in laboratories trying to develop new cultivars. And so the farmers didn't work in this systematic way that we see modern plant breeding doing, and which we even see today freelance, the new generation of freelance plant breeders doing. Very carefully selecting, I'm going to cross this variety with that variety, or I'm going to irradiate a plant in order to see whether I can force mutations to see what I will come up with. And so these people I always think of heroes. And to answer the question about why are they accidental heroes, is because actually how plants evolve and change is a result of genetic accidents. You know, DNA is really interesting stuff, and the genes and the groups of genes that make up our DNA they're not perfect. Mistakes happen. They don't replicate themselves identically time after time after time. And it's these little accidental changes that happen that are the things that have ensured that we have the diversity of crops we have today. So whether you like it or not, it doesn't matter whether you wear a white coat or you're an indigenous farmer working in fields anywhere in the world, when things change, it's actually something accidental that has happened to cause it to be the case. And I think that the other thing we shouldn't forget is that when we look at traditional varieties in particular, they carry with them a memory. And that memory goes all the way back to their wild parents. And I'll come on to it later, but one of the things that I've discovered over the years, particularly talking to indigenous farmers, not just in the US, but in India and Africa, across Europe, is this idea of this worry about climate change. We agonize about what's happening to the climate. But you know something, if you're a genetically diverse plant, you have a long distant past. And it doesn't just go back to when you were domesticated, 12,000, 10,000 years ago. It goes back to when your wild parents first evolved through a whole succession of accidents over tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years ago. And so they have existed and changed through real extremes of climate change. What we have now is nothing compared to what the climate was like 40,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago. And many of the indigenous farmers that I've got to talk to, when I ask them about how do they deal with climate change, they look at me as if they don't understand. They don't think about climate change as this kind of existential threat that we have to face. Because if you are an indigenous farmer in sub-Saharan Africa, or in India, or in South America, what you're worrying about is, am I going to get any rains next year? Are they going to come too early? Are they going to come too late? Is there going to be enough of them? And this is something they think about all the time. They are living with climate insecurity constantly, and have done for generations and generations, because there's never been anything, such a thing as a stable climate. And what I've learned from them about what is it that they are doing, what is it how they are employing, and how they think about their crops and their relationships with them, which ensures that whatever happens to the weather, there's something they're going to be able to feed their families with, and if they're lucky, sell their surplus in the market, pay to educate their children. And I think that's something that we need to remind ourselves of when we are sitting in our gardens and look at the year that we're having this year, look at the year last year, and how are we going to be able to cope? Well, actually, just look at what a lot of other people are doing. And they made their choices about what they were growing and maintaining, which ensured that there was enough diversity amongst all of the crops they were growing that regardless of what happened with the weather, something was going to do okay. Then, of course, it all changed. And the key time when it changed, in 12,000 years, we've had accidental farmers as plant breeders. A couple of hundred years ago, we started to get systematic about it. And I think one of the things, I don't know whether you think about in America, the 19th century in America was a crazy time of freelance and organized plant breeding. I don't know how many of you know about a wonderful book. It's really important for me, which is The Vegetables of New York, which was published at the end of the 19th century. And when I was doing research, I thought, I wonder how many peas they've bred in America in the 19th century. Over 1,000 varieties. And sure, they weren't all different, because plant breeders can be rogues and charlatans, just like all of us in other ways. And so they would see something they liked and they may change the name, or they may say they'd improved it and they'd add to the number. But what it tells me is that there was a time when actually people were just obsessed about peas. And whether you were a homesteader or a hobby gardener or a small scale grower, actually what you were doing was going out there and getting involved in pea breeding. And in the UK it was much the same. The Royal Horticultural Society had a register in 2000, right in 1910. We had over 250 varieties that were registered with the Royal Horticultural Society. And I think that what's happened is that this cohort, but most importantly, the farmers and indigenous growers, they've become marginalized with the development of modern plant breeding. This idea that actually there's a better way if we work in a molecular environment, and that we need to be producing actually things that are genetically identical, that have huge yields, and of course support an agricultural system where actually the true winners are not the farmers, but the stockholders and the huge companies that run them. But this crisis that we are living in is actually something that we are changing. And because those seed heroes that I talked about in the past, we're all back in force. You know, there are people here today who I consider to be seed heroes. You are breeding new varieties. I see them in the seed tents here, obviously FEDCO and others, but then amongst the market gardeners selling their produce just down the way there. And I'm just glad and excited about this journey of restoring genetic diversity. And that's we can all believe we're going to hell in a handcart, but if that's how we feel, if I really felt like that, I'd have slit my throat a long time ago. I'm a real optimist, and I see real positivity and opportunity everywhere, and I grasp hold of it, and I want to shout about it, because the more we recognize that we are on a journey which is actually getting us to a much better place, the more likely we are to achieve it. But I also wanted just to mention a couple of people that are real seed heroes to me, and the influence they had on how I approached growing. And one of them was a guy called, sure you've heard of him, Craig LaHoulier. And back, 30 years or so ago, I was in the States and I bought some seeds of a tomato, Cherokee Purple, and it was my first introduction to an American heirloom. And it was, it's amazing that, I feel very fortunate that I was subsequently got to know Craig a little and talk to him about when I'm doing my research, and the fact that he had his dwarf tomato project, something that is also being embraced in Europe. I was at a forum in Luxembourg just a couple of weeks ago, meeting up with plant breeders who are working on trying to create delicious new varieties of tomatoes that can be grown outdoors in Europe, in Northern Europe, which is a challenge, which are showing resistance to Philoptera, to late season blight, but above all, which are delicious, because if you're a grower and a breeder, there's no point in producing something that doesn't taste good and that nobody wants to eat. And so people like Craig and others across Europe particularly make me feel very positive and optimistic. And I think one of the things is how they, along with others who are growing these land races, or what I call FBs, these locally adapted varieties, which are then being maintained and which can then evolve naturally as the climate changes, so that when we get more extremes, they feel less within themselves as crops worried by it, because of course they have that memory, that distant memory, which is they remember hotter, colder, wetter, drier. And those genes within these huge diverse genomes can be dormant for thousands of years. And then suddenly something happens and it can trigger that dormancy. And suddenly that knowledge that's within the seed can come forward. And that's how you get adaptiveness and change. One of the other great seed heroes for me is the late Alan Capula. And when I was writing The Seed Detective, I'd bought seeds, some of the first seeds I'd ever got in America, Seeds of Change, and that was what brought me to the Seed Savers Exchange, which is a very similar organization to one that I've been on the board of, had been for some years, Garden Organic, with its own incredible gene bank, the Heritage Seed Library, which is holds the national collection of heritage heirloom off-list varieties in the UK. And I was lucky enough to engage in a lengthy correspondence with him, because he had developed a pea which I think was called Purple Blush, and when I saw this pea it reminded me of a mange tout, a snap pea that I had found in a market in Luang Prabang. Luang Prabang is the ancient capital of the country of Laos in Indochina, on the Mekong River. And I was traveling down the Mekong looking at kind of what I call extreme organic horticulture, where the river floods every year, and as the waters subside, it deposits on its bank a whole new soil that's been brought down from the Himalayas, thousands of kilometers away. And the farmers cut out of these banks, as the water subsides, they cut out layers and terraces, and they grow these many local crops. And I was in a market in Luang Prabang. That's where I go when I'm on the road traveling, 5 o'clock in the morning, go to the market. And there I found a woman who was an archetype. She's somebody that I've spent the last 35 years or more looking for. And she had in her market, she was selling these her garlic and onions, and she had little packets of seeds, and among them were these pea seeds. And I bought some from her and I took them home. I tell the story, hilarious story of my conversation with her, which I wrote about in the Seed Detective. But this is a very prolific mosh too, and it has the pink blush in it, which is the same blush that Alan had been breeding in his a new pea sugar snap that he was selling. And it was, I thought, how curious. I realized that again, you know, within the genome of that pea were the traits already existing that came to the fore, became dominant to give that purple pink blush to it. And you know, he's a man whose approach to plant breeding was visionary and inspirational, and his sort of deep knowledge and curiosity mirrored his 19th century forebears, but also demonstrates why we're on a continuum. This is a journey we're all on together, and we should continue it together. I mean, I'm a filmmaker and a storyteller, and one of the things I've always wanted to do is, or like to do, is to find out about things and explore subjects I know nothing about. And actually, the one thing I really know nothing about is plant breeding. And I thought, do you know what? I really want to find out where we're going. I know where we've come from, and I know about understanding the relationship we have with what we grow and eat from the stories that started 12,000 years ago. But how are we going to be part of a solution that builds a world that is where we are restoring biodiversity to our stark soil? We're making the way we grow and produce food something that is not adding carbon to the atmosphere, but is actually part of the solution of reducing it. And that is brought me to a kind of, you know, a lot of interesting people. But I thought, I've got to start somewhere. I really don't know anything about this subject. I know what I will do. I will call Carol, I call her Carol Depp. CR calls her Carol Deppy, but I haven't dared ask her correctly which way.
And neither did I.
Yeah, we're both a couple of cowards in that regard. But because I never thought of myself as a plant breeder, I was in the business of growing seed to return to libraries. You know, I was very involved with the Heritage Seed Library. They'd say, Adam, can you grow these runner beans for me? And you're in an isolated place, it's fine. So my job was to try and keep things consistent. And so I got in touch with Carol, and I think of her as the kind of fairy godmother of traditional plant breeding. And, you know, she wrote this book's like a Bible for plant breeders. And she always struck me as a woman who doesn't take any prisoners. And there she was interrogating me about what were my motives, what did I know about it, what were my abilities. And of course, I didn't really think I had any. But she said something really important to me, which really gave me the title of the book, because she made me think differently about my own identity as somebody who is saving seeds and maintaining varieties. Because she said, Adam, whether you like it or not, you're a plant breeder. And that's because when you're saving seeds generation after generation, those seeds, those plants are evolving, they're changing, they're becoming better adapted to growing in your part of the world. And even if you don't try to do it deliberately through systematic approaches, modern plant breeding, certainly over the last 200 years, then you're still a plant breeder. And then, of course, she then said, yeah, well, it's high time you started to do some systematic plant breeding. Read my book, take notes. And, you know, I'm no spring chicken, and I know how long it takes to develop new cultivars in a systematic, traditional way. And I think I'm just going to leave it to a younger generation. As I say, the clock is ticking. And also to people who are a lot more skilled than me in being able to grow and maintain seeds. But I do call myself an evolutionary plant breeder. And I think all of us who are saving seeds, we can call ourselves that because we sit within that continuum. And one of the things I talked about earlier was, you know, we think of local varieties. There's a sort of technical term for them, which is landrace. I remember meeting up with some folks in Arizona talking about the indigenous, the crops of Native Americans in that part of the world. And of course, they talk about these land races as farmers' varieties or folk varieties, FVs. And so I embrace that because I think it's a phrase that really is much easier for us to embrace. But there's another term, GVs, gardeners' varieties, and that's what I think that I'm growing. And if you think of many of the great heirloom and heritage varieties of American vegetables that you grow and love, they're actually GVs. They were things that came out of people's gardens that were loved, and then maybe some smart plant breeder or the likes of Craig LeHoulier found them and decided to do more with them and then make them more available. Just want to step back to kind of where it started for me, this process of collecting seeds and growing them out. As I say, I have a large living collection, over 500 varieties. I'm not growing them all at the same time, but I keep them as a living collection by rotating over several years. And it started for me, as I said at the beginning, in Donetsk, which is where I met this archetype, this little old lady, in her case augmenting her meager pension by selling crops from her garden, which is where I came across this pepper. And this pepper is a fundamental part not only of Ukrainian food culture, but food culture the whole of Eastern and Central Europe, the Eastern Mediterranean. And you have to think of paprika, Hungary, peppers, they're a big deal. And various reasons, I needed to be able to feed my crew with good quality food, and I took this pepper I bought the pepper from her, and it was something that she'd been growing in her family for generations and generations, right through the worst time of the Soviet Union, collective farms and, you know, famine. And when I bit into that pepper, it was a total wow moment for me. And everybody loved eating it, but it's thick-fleshed, it's fruity, it has personality, and it also has a lovely bit of heat. It just lets you know it's there. Well, I tell you, if you go down to a supermarket and buy a pepper that's been grown in Southern California, I can guarantee you it's got no flavor, no personality. Zip. Why would you want to eat that when you could grow your own pepper, particularly grown by a little old lady in Donetsk? And I thought, I wonder if I can bring this seed home and grow it back in the UK. And you know, the climate's very different in southern Ukraine, close to the Black Sea, to my bit of wet Wales. But over the last 35 years, I've been able to follow in that tradition without even thinking about it, of selecting, saving the seeds of those fruits that I really felt, wow, they represent the phenotype of this crop. They've got the flavor, the color. When it's ripe, it's deep, deep red. It's a beautiful color. I gave some to Joe Lampel seed, and he just went wild for it, and he grows it and now shares seeds with his neighbors. But you guys, you grow peppers outside here. We can't do that in the UK because we never get hot enough summers for the most part. But I've been able to select for this pepper so that it's the first to flower, it fruits over the longest period, and I can grow it outside. I tell you, I mean, it's growing very happily right now. When I get back home middle of October, I'm expecting to keep harvesting them. But what's also great is now an independent seed company, a sort of mini version of FEDCO in Devon. I've given them the seed. They are now bulking it up. They're also working themselves to improve it, which is brilliant, so that it becomes available to more people than the handful who find my website and say, hey Adam, can I have some of those Donetsk pepper seeds? And it's all thanks to this archetype, another one I found in Laos. I go looking for the little old ladies who are growing these varieties that are so important in their own food culture.
So Adam, would you say would be the key premise of your work as a author and communicator?
I mean, I think what is important for me is I think that we can all ensure, if you like, that whether we are just gardeners with a small plot, or we are, professional growers who may have 10, 20 acres, or we are those indigenous farmers with very small plots, 2 acres, 3 acres, that what we are growing is adaptive, is heterogeneous, and actually really resonates at a local level. The more we grow and feed ourselves locally, the more resilient we are in the face of climate extreme, and also just the quality of food that we're eating. And as I said, focusing on doom and gloom it doesn't help, and I don't plan to focus on negativity this morning with you all. I'm an eternal optimist. I believe we can fix all of this, and working towards this food system that is really about nourishing ourselves and the planet is really, really important. But it's also listening to everybody. It's taking the best of what we've learned from the past, listening to the voices of people who know a lot more about how to survive over a very long period than we do. But it's also working, I get very excited by the science and technology of plant breeding. It's just really important that we are in control of how it is being utilized. We should never allow ourselves anymore to be disenfranchised from all of the amazing opportunities of both traditional and molecular plant breeding. And I'm not in the business of preaching to the converted either, but I just hope that by sharing my stories and insights, and above all, I think providing context, that understanding how we think about the way we grow food, our relationship with it, and that we can be on a very positive and constructive, brilliant journey that is enriching to us at every level in our lives, body and soul, I think is really important. And that we are part of the solution. It's not somebody else that we need to look to be doing this. We do this ourselves. And I think we're already seeing amazing results, and there's more to come. And can we build a farming system that nurtures the planet? Can we return our depleted soils to fertility and greater health, and enjoy all of that deliciousness, and particularly regardless of our circumstances? Eating good, high quality, nutrient dense, delicious food is a right for all of us, regardless of our income, our position in life. And we have to do it because we must. It's not about a choice anymore. That's what we have to do. So let's just get on and do it. I mean, one of the things I say, thank you. One of the things that, I'm the tender age of 74, and I kind of like to think, will I make it to 99? Then there'll be 2050. And I actually really believe that by 2050, we can be living in a world where agriculture is empowering and at the heart of a carbon neutral world. And I want to hope that people who've never grown anything, they live in a city, they too feel that they're part of the solution, because they're making choices when they go to the store to buy the food that they need to eat. And so that we all are together part of an agroecological future. And this involves everyone, all our fellow eaters, as CR likes to call us. And it's through those choices that we make that we really build a momentum for change.
Well, Adam, a little bit echoing what Sarah introduced a little bit in her remarks this morning. I have to say that, here in Maine and really across the whole U.S., seed producers and independent breeders and market gardeners and some of the larger scale farmers even are either going bust or really struggling right now. And it seems like they're fighting a losing battle against the hegemony of big ag. So perhaps this is a little more of a pessimistic perspective, but I think Adam, that you've already begun to describe a more optimistic trajectory, and I think you have an even broader historical perspective to share here about where we've been in the last 50 years and where we can go.
Well,
and Adam, just before you start that, I want to invite any audience members as we come to the conclusion of our keynote today. If you'd like to ask a question while Adam's answering this question, please come up here and we'll ask your question as well and have Adam and CR answer. So please come on up if you'd like to ask a question. And we do have books available, Adam's book right over here on the side of the stage, if you'd like to purchase that after the keynote today. So please come up if you have a question, and Adam, please continue.
Thanks. Well, look where we've come. I read in a magazine in Maine, 1971 there was one farmer's market in Maine. Today I'm reliably informed there's over 100. 50 years ago, when I was foolishly thinking I should become a market gardener, the idea of being an organic grower, you were treated with derision, certainly in the UK, and nobody wanted to eat yellow courgettes or red Brussels sprouts because they thought I was trying to poison them. So I remind myself that I'm very glad that I'm here today, not where I was 50 years ago. And so this kind of, I see a graph and it bumbles along the bottom, but also it is growing. And it's going to get steeper and steeper. And to me, that's the thing when I get out of bed every morning, I think, okay, it's another day. I'm a little bit closer to the solution, to seeing some really good answers. And, it's again about language. Rather than battling with big ag, we need to look at the battles we can win, and that's about how we use language. Here we are, common ground, in unity, where there are two other towns where you've got liberty and freedom just down the road. I mean, these are words that are iconic within American culture, and this is the language that we need to use, particularly to be able to tell really powerful and compelling stories about what it is that we're doing and why other people should be on it. And long may it continue.